Good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to see you. I'm Scott Bergmann. I'm Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at CTIA, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first panel of this year's Everything Policy program. I will say I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. We have the opportunity to talk about what's really a landmark, historic opportunity for our industry to bring more spectrum to market to fuel our continued growth. We're going to talk about the spectrum provisions of the Reconciliation Act, which do two really important things. They restore the FCC's auction authority, and they call for an 800 megahertz pipeline of spectrum. So we've got a fantastic, all-star panel today to help us understand it. I really want to do two things. I want to understand what our industry's priorities, and I want to understand how we can work with policymakers to help, as Ajit talked about this morning, execute on that vision that Congress gave us through this act. So I'm going to start with introductions to my left. We have Tom Dombrowsky. Tom is Vice President of Engineering and Technology Policy at T-Mobile. Next to Tom, we have Raquel Noriega. Raquel is Assistant Vice President, Federal Regulatory at AT&T. We have Will Johnson in the center. Will is Senior Vice President of Federal Regulatory and Legal Affairs at Verizon. Next up is Jayne Stancavage. Jayne is Vice President of Policy and Regulatory Affairs with Intel. And rounding out our lineup is Jeff Marks. Jeff is Vice President of Government and Policy with Ericsson. So welcome to you all. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, as I said. I want to frame it a little bit by recalling President Trump talking about this bill this summer, and he called it serious power for restoring America's wireless leadership. I thought that was really interesting, and so I want to really just level set with you guys about what is the state of 5G today, and then I want to ask you a question with some optionality. I want to ask you, what does it mean, either to your company or to the industry, to the country, to have auction authority restored and to have a path for a new spectrum pipeline? And I'm really going to do this as an all-play. Tom, why don't you start us off?
Oh, sure. Thanks. Glad to be here today. We're very excited at T-Mobile that we have auction authority back again. I'll note that the focus of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is on mid-band spectrum, which we think is critical. On the 5G front, T-Mobile is first to deploy non-standalone 5G, first to have L4S, which is some nerd speak for ensuring latency on the network is better than it is. We also are the first to have nationwide 5G advanced in our network as well. So we feel that 5G has been hugely beneficial to the U.S. and to our consumers and customers. And we're very excited that the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is focused on mid-band spectrum, which we think is going to be critical to really driving 5G advanced and 6G after that.
Fantastic. Raquel?
Definitely echo Tom's comments. It was absolutely imperative to get auction authority restored. We've been fighting for a long time, job done, for 10 years, or I guess 9. So that's first and foremost a very important thing for our industry and for the demand and the customers that we support. Secondly, there is a strong pipeline. 800 megahertz is a good start. It is slated to be, there's a timeline associated with it, again, about 9 years in 3 tranches. The first one applying to the upper C-band that will have to be auctioned in a couple years. And then there's 2 other tranches that are actually identified in the bill. We think that is a good start. And like I said, or like Tom said, focusing on mid-band. Mm-hmm. For us, 5G is, the data speaks for itself. You guys, your latest study speaks for itself. I had to write this down. 132 trillion megabits of data in 2024. That is a lot of data. I'm not sure what that means, but it's a lot. And that was up year to year by 32 trillion, 35% increase. That's a trend that is not new, but it is accelerating. And that means more double the data every 2 to 3 years. What is 5G for us? What has 5G accomplished for us? Our customers have not noticed that this vast demand in data is occurring because AT&T and our competitors and our vendors have stepped up to the plate to build these networks, but we couldn't have done it without mid-band. So critical for 5G, critical to have additional access to spectrum, to continue to be over the next decade, to continue to be able to meet that voracious demand.
Fantastic. Thanks, Raquel. Will?
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for CTIA for having me, and thanks for making sure we're not going to get thirsty. It's going to be a very well-hydrated panel.
The panel's only 3 hours. You should be fine.
Well, last year you guys didn't start the clock, and so I felt like it was actually up here for 3 hours.
We're preparing for all possible
yes,
outcomes.
Yes. So thanks for having me. So what a difference a year makes, right? So last year when we were up here on our Spectrum panel, on the one I was on, I feel like I was like Cassandra up here, wringing my hands and pulling out my hair about how we didn't have we weren't making enough progress towards a real plan. And now, in a year, it's a very different picture. With the OB3, we have a mandate for at least 800. I like your point that 800, that is the right number. We think of that as a minimum amount, right? We have auction authority, so that's good. So to your original question, what's the state of 5G? I've always wanted that question because I watched the State of the Union. The state of 5G is strong right now. The marketplace is super competitive. Our executives say it's probably the most competitive wireless marketplace we've ever seen. We're deploying, investing super aggressively. We've announced that for our C-band that we're still in the process of deploying, we should hit 80 to 90% of all of our planned sites by the end of this year, and pretty much finish up the initial build plan next year. So that's proceeding apace, and that's really exciting for us because we know that where we have deployed C-band, and we'll talk more about C-band later, we see that our customers love it, we love it, the performance is great, our uptick, for customers in terms of their plans, et cetera, goes up where we have C-band deployed, and our churn goes down. So it's really been a great product for us. It's also enabled fixed wireless access, which has really been, so far, the killer app for 5G. I think we would all agree. You hear these numbers all the time, and every now and then you have to sort of pause and actually think what that means. So as of the end of the last quarter, second quarter, we already have 5 million FWA customers. A couple of years ago, didn't really exist. 5 million customers is a lot of people, right? I'm one of them. I love it. It's a great service. So that's very exciting. So I think the state of the marketplace of 5G is really strong. It's really competitive. It's really doing a lot to serve customers. Doesn't mean we can sort of slow down. I still think we're a little bit, a better place than we were a year ago. Have a lot of work to do to really go. I love the way Ajit sort of framed it up this morning. We have, I won't do the whole Seinfeld thing, but we have a goal now. We have a mandate even, which is great. But there's so much detail that really needs to be filled out and fairly quickly so that we don't just plan to plan again, but actually have a vision, a roadmap that we can all actually plan towards over the next many years. So I think we have a lot of work to do, but we're in a pretty good place.
That's great. That's exciting. Well, Jayne and Jeff, I do hope to get your perspective as well too, particularly from a manufacturer's perspective.
Yeah, so the good news is I don't have any stats. So I'm just going to pull out some of the bigger picture, right? Which is, if you think usually generation to generation, it's usually about a decade. There's been a lot of consolidation in the marketplace, and it's really challenging to do something if it's sort of decade to decade. And so having interim points where there's greenfield deployments happening on new spectrum is really important. It gets new technological advances. Virtualization is a great example. Virtualized RAN out into the field before you do the next big step in technology. But it also allows some of the revenue to accrue and all of the ecosystem to sort of stay in place as they're able to sort of put in the new development costs, the new research and development, and it is, as you advance semiconductor nodes, it does get more and more expensive. So just having sort of not one and then 10 years later, but stuff in between is crucial.
Yeah, sure. So I would say, again, the state of 5G is strong. The U.S. has rolled out 5G in record times. Americans have been enjoying coverage, capacity, speeds of 5G. But I think it's important to know that it's a success already, but we're only halfway through. We've got as you mentioned, 10 years. The next G is scheduled for 2030 when the full standard will come out. And of course, there will be early signs with 5G advanced. But what you've also got is, in addition to these advancements, all three carriers now are rolling out standalone 5G. T-Mobile Tom mentioned certain advancements that come with slicing and with a standalone network. FWA is the killer app now, where we see other use cases coming along that will take advantage of standalone, more industrial and enterprise use cases. So the state of 5G is strong, but we're looking forward to the next act, the second half of the decade, to even be stronger.
This is a great table setting and very encouraging. Raquel, you talked about how 5G is helping meet consumer demand. Will, you talked about how it's bringing competition. Several of you talked about the innovations that's unlocking. I think Ajit said earlier, with 5G, the best is yet to come, which I think very much captures the sentiment of this group here as well, too. So let's talk about, Will, your point about how do we execute, right, on the act. And one of the most important provisions is the call to bring 300 megahertz of spectrum available from non-federal use to 5G use. And one key element of that is the focus on C-band. Raquel, I think you talked about it. Will, you talked about it. You guys have experience with the C-band. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about what that experience was with the lower C-band and what kind of opportunities getting access to the upper C-band would mean. And a couple of you might want to jump in on here, but Raquel, do you want to kick us off?
Sure, happy to do so. So first on lower C-band, as I mentioned earlier, our 5G strategy is layered on all low band, mid band, and millimeter wave licenses. The horsepower is the mid band, and in our case, for AT&T, that means C-band and also the ambit band 345 to 355 gigahertz. C-band in particular, on a personal note, I can tell you that we were jumping at the bit to light that band up. We were jumping at the bit in 2021, and we were a little delayed. We were jumping at the bit in 2023, when, if you recall, we were the clearing of the satellites happened a few months early, and that created some glitches because we had the deployments down. We were like literally ready to light it up the day after, which did create some interesting hiccups for the cable side. But and we are actually jumping at the bit still. We're rolling out like Verizon, like Will just said. We're still rolling out our build out plan. We currently reach for 5G 310 million, but for 5G plus, which is relying on the great capacity of the mid-band spectrum, that's 285 million pops. And growing, because in 2025, we're jumping at the bid to deploy more mid-band spectrum that we have recently announced we're being acquired in the secondary market. Upper C-band. Upper C-band is a great opportunity, and I would argue it's a great opportunity for the public to get us that capacity we need to meet that voracious demand, but also for the three industries involved: our industry, the aviation industry, which is adjacent, which has a very important radio altimeter use case just adjacent to the band, and the satellite industry that is currently utilizing 200 megahertz of the band. We have a great deal of optimism about what we can do here, we have been, good news, we don't want to repeat what happened in 2021, and the good news is that we have been working, everybody in this, a lot of people in this room have been working to make sure that we are collaborating and understanding what the new radio altimeter standards characteristics are, and we've been working very closely with the aviation industry. Very importantly, There's a lot that needs to happen between now and July 4th, 2027. And we're going to need all of government approach here, in particular the FCC, the FAA, and the NTIA, to collaboratively move two complex proceedings forwards that have to feed on each other. The good news is they are already collaborating, and industry is here to support them. But there's definitely a lot of work ahead. In our discussions with the aviation industry, we have built a consensus. Very recently, we had a joint ex parte meeting. There were, 27 people from our industry as well as the aviation industry in the meeting. And things are not completely settled. How we're going to share the adjacency of the two services is not settled. But where we do have consensus is at least 180 megahertz of full power spectrum that can coexist with a new RA technology. That's pretty wild. So that's the very good news. We still have a lot of homework to do. Very importantly, we need to figure out the timelines, both the regulatory timelines, but also the timelines for when the new radio altimeter technology is going to be installed in the fleets, so that that promise, that we can all leverage that promise. So a lot there. Also, very importantly, the satellite industry. The incumbent users and their customers need to be accommodated. So that's a very important piece that it's going to have to be worked out. We definitely believe, with all this complexity, that this is going to be a win-win-win, and we're really looking forward to it.
Will, there are probably 5 questions I want to ask you about this band, but you have a lot of experience, right, working with aviation over the last couple of years, and wonder if you can talk a little bit about what that experience tells you about the opportunity, and then any other framing thoughts about sort of what you think the FCC will have to do to get us. Raquel talked a little bit about, it's not just a directive, but it's also a timeline as well too. And how would you advise the FCC on moving forward?
Sure. So Raquel covered a lot of ground there, so I won't repeat any of that. But just the initial question of how much do we like C-band? Do we care about C-band? I'll remind people we spent $53 billion, so a real generational investment in C-band, and we love it. It's sort of we love our millimeter wave, we love all our spectrum, but the C-band really is the backbone of our 5G service nationwide. So it's been great. You're absolutely right that we have probably a few scars from the previous experience. I don't need to relitigate who was right or wrong or all the history here. I'm sure most of the people in this room remember it, but we don't want to repeat that this time. And I think the good news is, when in living through first round of C-band, I was thinking about this morning. Had a lot of work for many years. Most of the conversations were really focused just on the satellite piece of it, which is an important piece of the puzzle. And aviation was, unfortunately for me, and maybe this was my own fault, a little bit of almost an afterthought in the process. It was only when things started going really sideways, well after an auction, that we realized that was, an equally, if not more important piece of the puzzle that we also had to solve. And while it started off as a little bit of a rocky experience, I will say that I feel like we're much better positioned this time for having lived through it, including understanding the issues better, including having relationships at this point and ongoing productive conversations with the other side. In fact, I would say I'm actually friends with some of them. You don't have to tell them that, but we've been in the trenches and trying to problem solve together for many years at this point. So Raquel's absolutely right. There's still numerous technical challenges to work through, but we have made a ton of progress together. I think everybody in the room when we have these discussions is really trying to get to that win-win or maybe even win-win-win situation that is a real possibility here. So I think that we can get there. In terms of the challenges and what I would advise the FCC, I think that the real challenge is less technical probably and more on, I'll say, timing and incentives. And those really do go together in a pretty fundamental way here because we, unlike other auctions that we can talk about, we have a pretty good sense of when this one's going to happen, right, in terms of the auction itself. We have a much less clear sense at this point in terms of when that spectrum will actually be made available. And I don't think any of us would consider it success to have a great big auction in 2027 and no spectrum we can use until, 2035 or something, right? Like, that's not a workable solution when you're looking to invest billions of dollars and when you're going to have demands in your network and 5G advanced and 6G and all these other things, like you need to have the spectrum. And so getting that piece of it right, I think is top of mind for me. And I think the FCC, I know that they're very focused on that. I know that they're thinking through how to collaborate with FAA and all the other stakeholders to sort of solve this riddle. But it's complex. Fortunately, the altimeter industry and the aviation industry, sort of aside from our spectrum issues, we're working on new altimeters and are going to do that. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. We have to find a way to really speed that up because, I don't want to bash them, but their standard setting processes are just really, really slow and cumbersome. I mean, the current generation of altimeters is relying on stuff from, the 70s or something. And they haven't moved super quickly in terms of finalizing the one that they're working on now. So I think they're working in faith in that. They understand the time pressures from our perspective, but they got to finalize their standards. The FAA's got to require that, approve them and require it all be implemented on planes. Then you actually have to go out and physically do the work to, replace things, and that's going to take some time. And so speeding that up as much as reasonably possible and making sure that they're incentivized to do that work as quickly as possible so that, we can have a successful auction and actually get the spectrum out into use. That's really, I think, the long pole in the tent right now and probably the most important thing for policymakers to really be focused on.
Yeah, it's a critical element. Tom, we talked about timing, we talked about coexistence. Is there anything else you'd want to add into the mix?
No, I'm just going to double click on what both Raquel and Will said. I mean, number one, this problem is a good bit more complex than the lower C. In the lower C, we had 220 megahertz guard band between us and radio altimeters. Here, we're talking maybe 40 or 60 megahertz of guard band between us and altimeters. So that's made the problem that much more complex from a technical standpoint. Second, I think this time, I really feel like the FAA is more engaged earlier in the process, which is extremely helpful. I think we need to make sure that the FAA and FCC work collaboratively to really set goals and timelines on this spectrum. T-Mobile, our prime mid-band spectrum is 2.5 gigahertz. That being said, we have lower C, we have 40 megahertz of lower C across the country. And adding in the upper C, we are the direct adjacent band to the upper C. So from our perspective, we're anxious for this auction to come to fruition, to have the set timelines that we've been working 6 months on thus far. And hopefully that will continue along. I will say, I will echo what both Raquel and Will said. The work that's going on right now has been very, very useful, helpful, and I feel like we're problem solving more so than we did the last time around.
Jeff and Jayne, if you want to, hoping you might be able to bring your perspective as representatives of international vendors, and part of the C-band, right, C-band is part of an internationally harmonized band of spectrum for 5G, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of that. Policymakers are very focused on how do we get every last bit of efficiency out of each megahertz of spectrum. How does that help?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. So, to start with, and this has been true for decades, the U.S., well, first of all, is Ericsson's largest and most important market, and we have for decades, when there's a band that's U.S. only, there is economy of scales in the U.S. to build for the market, but it's not ideal. And those economies of scale only get better if you've got a global band like the C-band. So we're excited that the C-band, and then I think we have teed up for later other bands that are also the U.S. is looking at the same time as the rest of the world. You get efficiencies in things like handsets work all over the world, that you get to build a single product for the world so that the U.S. benefits from that even greater economy of scale. And on top of that, when the U.S. And the rest of the world are rowing in the same direction, it gives the U.S. a greater opportunity to lead on standards and technology development in a band if the U.S. is developing in the same band as other markets. So there's any number of benefits to having, moving toward more global harmonization.
The only thing I can add is that, obviously we all know how important it is to have the spectrum available in a timely manner. It's also, many countries look to the technical rigor of what has happened in the United States for these discussions to try to help set their own requirements. And so, yes, it's really important. The US is an incredibly important market, I think, to everybody in the industry. But then also, when you look at the other countries, they are looking to the US as to how it's been solved and what those technology requirements are.
Well, Jeff, you gave the perfect lead in. We talked a little bit about the commercial pillar of the Act. I want to turn also to the second key pillar of the Act, which is the directive to find at least, and Raquel, I'm putting the emphasis on at least, there 500 megahertz of federal spectrum that can be repurposed for 5G use. And I want to talk to you guys a little bit about priorities, how you think about that. Maybe Will, I'll give you this one to kick off.
Sure. Yeah, so I think a lot of us, probably everybody in this room knows there's several sort of game pieces on the table now that are in discussion in terms of which band should be considered. I think when you provided us questions ahead, you were like, which ones are most important? And the short answer is they're all potentially important. I don't have a, Verizon, we're still open-minded on every band that's being discussed. So whether you're talking 2.7, whether you're talking CBRS, whether you're talking 4.4 to 4.9, or even up, in the 7 gigahertz range, all those are potentially very interesting and very important. And all of them at this stage of things, it makes sense to have on the table. I do think, as we talked about earlier, we got to fairly quickly move past this to figure out which ones are going to be most workable on reasonable time frames, and because there's puts and takes on each in terms of the systems that are there now and where they are relative to other uses, et cetera. So I think we have to be open-minded to all of these. I think they're all high-quality bands potentially with different puts and takes, and just have to quickly drive down to figure out where we're going to go. I think one thing that we haven't talked about much yet, but I suspect is on all of our minds, is when we do this, one lens that we have to view this through is what's actually workable, what's doable from a contiguity perspective. I think, as I talk with my network team, I'm hearing a lot about, as standards setting process is starting to develop towards 6G, there's a much more emphasis on having large contiguous blocks of spectrum. You can debate, and I've heard different numbers in terms of what the ideal would be, whether that's 200, 400. I mean, there's different possibilities. In any event, whether it's 200 or whether it's 400, that's a big block, right? And so the one concern I have as we start thinking through the different possibilities is being careful not to sort of pick, 50 here, 100 there, 25 there, that, maybe gets you to whatever top level number you're aiming at, but doesn't at the end of the day give us sort of the large contiguous blocks that I think all of us are going to somehow want to patch together. And so I think that as we weigh the pluses and minuses of any of the ones I rattled off, that has to be top of mind.
Great. I'm glad you brought that up. I was thinking, Jeff and Tom, I might ask you a little bit about what are the factors you think about when you're looking at these bands, size of the band, propagation characteristic. You talked a little bit about practicality. I'm curious how you guys think about these.
Yeah, no, propagation is obviously front of mind when you talk about mid-band. You'd like to be lower in the mid-band than higher in the mid-band. I know there's a lot of discussion about 7 gigahertz, and we're very interested in 7 gigahertz and would like to deploy 7 gigahertz, but the reality is that 7 gigahertz does not propagate as well as C-band or 2.7 gigahertz. So from our perspective, focusing on those lower mid-band spectrum bands makes a lot of sense. In terms of ensuring that propagation will really go as far as we can with the same amount of power to ensure in-building coverage, to ensure that we're getting service out to the consumers in the most efficient way possible. I think secondarily, from that perspective, I want to echo what Will said. I feel like I'm echoing you a lot. I don't know. This is weird.
Echo away.
Very weird. Very weird. Broad bandwidth is sort of critical to 5G advanced into 6G. We have things like integrated sensing and communications coming along that really requires large bandwidth to actually develop and provide the fidelity that you need to do the sensing that needs to be done there. So having those large blocks and large bands is going to be ever so critical as we look at these spectrum bands. And I think the last piece, and while I do agree global harmonization helps with efficiencies and all that, I do also think looking at each of these bands in terms of the timing and availability. So for example, the government hasn't even started to look at 4 gigahertz yet, so we know full well that that's going to take a while. Whereas Upper C, they have an actual legislative deadline on it, so we're moving very fast on that. I think 2.7 gigahertz has a lot more visibility there. FAA is moving along on that even without any additional funding. So I think looking at it from a practical standpoint of what could be made available under this administration and get auctioned should be our focus, to get as much spectrum with as broad bandwidth, with as best propagation as we can done before 2028's over.
Jeff, anything?
Yeah, just that, I mean, a huge thank you to the Trump administration and to, the Congress for the OB3 that has an 800 megahertz goal. I think we spent a long time waiting for the prior administration to identify what a goal was for licensed 5G, and to have the 800 megahertz goal is extremely helpful, helps with business roadmaps, helps us plan, but I think as a White House official said, now the work starts, because the 800 megahertz, other than a couple small bands, is not, small portions of that is not identified yet exactly how we're going to get there. And it is difficult to find sufficient spectrum for each operator to deploy robust 6G in the block sizes we need without, there's a lot of work to do. It is true we're looking at the 4 gigahertz band, I think has greater opportunities for contiguous spectrum blocks than some of the higher bands that are looked at, including 7, which we need to be a success. We are where we are in the United States, working around previously decided allocations and incumbents. So it's going to be tough, but we're looking forward to the C-band first. We're looking forward to 7 gigahertz, which we think is going to go next, 4 gigahertz, 2 gigahertz. The more we can get below, the more blocks we can get below the 10 gigahertz range for the propagation characteristic that those bands have, the better.
The only other piece I would add is that as much transparency as we can have as early as possible, because these are bands that aren't really deployed in other countries, and so you are creating a solution. And when you do that, you have things like, oh, we need special filters. Okay, how do you get those filters from the components vendors, right? How do you put those all into a solution? So having as much transparency as possible so you actually have the technology ready when it is available. And I want to double down on what Tom said in terms of some of the timeliness. That's factor number one, I think. I think, showing my age, the first time 2.7 to 2.9 was on the table was Carl Nebbia was at TIA, right? So just what's going to be there, how quickly, and then what do we need to know, because you're solving for different incumbents and different solutions, and that's going to have an impact on the technology and what you need to deploy it.
Wonderful. Raquel, I didn't give you a chance to weigh in on this. Did we miss any priorities or any pieces that we should be thinking about?
In terms of the priorities, I agree with much of what has been said. All of the bands are very interesting. I think one important thing to keep in mind is we shouldn't be prejudging the outcome as we set up these studies. We should study everything. The result of the studies will speak for themselves, but we shouldn't prejudge it. AT&T is very interested in the 4 gigahertz band in particular because it's already a 3GPP band. We understand, as Tom said, it wasn't in the previous path study, so there's going to be some work there done. I think on the 7 gig, I want to echo what Tom said, very interesting band, but because of its propagation characteristics, the size of the channels will matter a great deal. And so we need to keep that in mind as we explore those bands. But a lot of work ahead. But I do want to, if I may, a couple of minutes to focus on CBRS. Will mentioned CBRS. It is not a band that is explicitly mentioned in the Act, but it's certainly compatible with the goals of the Act, depending on whether or not, I presume depending on whether or not federal incumbents were to be repacked out of the band. It could be in the non-federal or the federal bucket that is a provision in this Act. We have a lot of, we think this band has a lot of potential. Last year in this very same forum, AT&T proposed a bold vision for the band to re-rationalize the band noting that it is sandwiched between the mid-band power, some of the mid-band 5G powerhouses in our nation. It's sandwiched in there with low power solutions. That is wasteful, spectrally speaking, in our opinion. And we think there's a lot of potential here to really look and focus on this band in the context of potentially its administration. And last year we presented a vision here that was focused on re-auctioning demand with full power, at full power or for full power use, while repacking incumbents. We had a vision of perhaps some of the incumbents could be repacked into the lower 3 gigahertz. That may not be possible given the act, but there are other bands, depending on the use case, that incumbents could be repacked to. And then there's other ideas that we think are worthy of exploration, such as potentially full power overlay rights over the existing structure. So there's a lot there, but AT&T is betting strongly on this band. At least we're going to try.
Yeah, can I jump in on that one as well? Because people may not realize it, but Verizon has actually invested more in CBRS and uses CBRS, I think, more than anyone. We spent billions buying PAL licenses. And we've thought a lot about the issues that AT&T raised last year and that have been in the discussion over the last year. I think we're pretty open-minded because I agree with Raquel. There's a lot of underutilization here in terms of what it could potentially do for us all. I was thinking about it, it's sort of like the nice neighborhood that has a 1950s Rambler on one lot, and at some point probably makes sense that either to do an addition or maybe tear it down, build something else. I don't know what exactly the right ultimate answer is in terms of whether it's fully re-auctioning it, maybe that's the tear down, I don't know, or if it's changing some of the rules around it, increasing power levels, things like that, they're already teed up. But I do think it makes sense to look at that. Again, we've invested a lot there, so details will matter in terms of making sure that current users like us are sort of taken care of in that process. But it's, as she said, it's a great prime real estate with high power 5G above it, 5G below it, and so it's not. I think it would be crazy not to think about that.
It's the golden 5G band. Potentially 750 megahertz of contiguous full power mid-band spectrum, 345 to 4.2.
Internationally harmonized.
Golden 5G band. I like the slogan.
I'll just weigh in here to say, I don't disagree with everybody else here said. I'll just note that number one, it doesn't appear that this is a priority band for NTIA at the moment. They didn't mention it at the Spectrum Symposium, so I'm a bit concerned about what the timing will be on this. And also, fundamentally, I think T-Mobile's perspective is if we do reinvestigate this, if we do teardowns, everybody should be able to bid for the new land. Is really where we're at on CBRS. And again, I just go back to my fundamental point of focusing on things that we think can be solved for as quickly as possible and hopefully during this administration. And if we can get CBRS going, I agree with you guys, let's go. But I'm a little skeptical in terms of the timing with the number of incumbents and the number of, and the fact that there doesn't seem to be a focus of the federal government right now.
Well, I did want to, before our panel wraps up, I wanted to turn an eye globally, right? The U.S. has historically played a key role in helping guide the rest of the world in terms of how spectrum policy is going to evolve. Jayne, you've spent so much time on this front. I know enough to know there's an international focus on harmonizing both the 4 gigahertz band and the 7 gigahertz band. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, between now and Work 27, what's important? What do we need to have the U.S. go out and lead on the bands that our companies are talking about here?
Well, I think the important thing is for the U.S. to know these are the bands that we want to promote for the next, 5.5, 5 advanced, 6G, because you need to have those decisions early so that you're able to go and in bilateral or regional group discussions, promote those bands, say these are a priority, say that this agenda item is a priority, and what the technical solution looks like. And if you wait until, the World Radio Conference isn't until November of 2027, if you wait until then, countries will have already made up their mind, regions have made up their mind. So just early figuring out, yes, this is a priority, and what we're going to go for, what we're going to promote, as opposed to having absolutely every I dotted and T crossed before you come up with a position.
Good advice.
Yeah, I'll go. I am extremely pleased that this administration appears ready to take on the fight and go and be part of WRC and lead and go in with our allies to take on that leadership position. I think it's emblematic too, for example, things like the American AI tech stack for export, where we're going into other countries and we're trying to sort of go toe-to-toe, competing and showing US leadership in connectivity and other technologies. So I think that, that's the interest in going into WRC strong is emblematic of that.
And let me just add one other thing. I mean, there's a lot in the Work 27 preparations about SAT to cell, and a lot of it is in SAT to cell into IMT bands. So we have to be vigilant and make sure we're getting protection for our IMT bands as we develop, hopefully, a global standard for SAT to cell services going forward in IMT bands.
That's a great flag.
And if I may add, just agree with everything said, but I think it's AT&T thinks it's very important that our international and domestic policy is aligned. The OB3 Act is focusing on the bands it's focusing, and our international positions need to be aligned with that domestic policy.
That's great.
Yeah, maybe one logistical point I'll add. I agree with you. I think the fact that we have OB3 and we have sort of a policy on 4, on 7, things like that, that should strengthen our ability to go in with a strong, U.S. position into it, which we didn't necessarily do last time around. And I think that the fact that this WRC in all likelihood is going to take place in China, just to my logistical concern, creates a lot of pressure for us to settle on those positions, build allies sooner rather than later, because I think it's just going to be a challenging WRC for our industry, for the U.S. government to navigate.
We've covered a lot of ground in a really short period of time, and we don't have nearly enough time left for me. We're in our last couple minutes, so I'm going to ask you guys one last question. And given the ground that we've covered, I'm going to ask you guys to pick one thing that you'd encourage policymakers to focus on that could make a big, big difference in terms of the state of 5G. You guys did a fantastic job talking about the strong state of 5G today. A year from now, what's the one thing you'd love to see policymakers achieve to help us drive that further? And Jeff, I'm going to start with you. We'll go the other direction and work down this way.
Well, we've had a good start with the big, beautiful bill with 800 megahertz. I'd encourage policymakers to stay transparent, continue to set goals, and work with industry so that we can move toward those goals.
I think probably the biggest one is go in with the mindset of how as opposed to if. What is the engineering solution? Not are we going to do this, but here's the problem. How do we solve it? Is probably key.
I'll wrap up sort of where I started in picking up on what Ajit said this morning about execution. I mean, it's great that we sort of know what, in a general sense, what we're shooting at right now, but we have to take that next step. And I know each one of these bands can be so hard. So C-band has all this complexity we have to work through, and there's a risk of getting so bogged down in solving what's right in front of you, of not quickly figuring out that roadmap for what comes next, right? We have pretty good line of sight for the next year. After that, it's a lot murkier. I do have a lot of confidence that Chairman Carr and Administrator Roth are very knowledgeable in these things. The administration is obviously supportive, so I feel that they will do that. But if there's one thing, it's really that. It's executing, it's having a clear roadmap and executing on it.
Collaboration. A year from now, we should have an order, an upper C-band order, where there's challenges, but we need to collaborate. We need to continue to collaborate. That's the good news, to get that done. For all the other complex bands up for study, we need to start studying all of the bands, or continue studying all of the bands. And transparency is going to be the key. We need to build consensus, and without transparency, that's going to be very hard to do.
And I'll just say that, the only thing in the OBBA that has a deadline is the upper C-band auction. And I think the government should focus on delivering as much spectrum as they possibly can under this administration. So I think finding some timelines, getting more spectrum out and as much as they could possibly do before 2028 in the mid-band should be the absolute goal of this administration. They shouldn't just look and say, oh, I have to do the 200 megahertz in 2 years. I have to do 400 megahertz in 4. No, just blow past those guidelines and set some real deadlines and get some stuff done here during this administration. Because as we all know who've been through spectrum wars, when you have the ability to actually move on things, you should move on things while you can.
This is fantastic. I've heard the focus on collaboration, execution across the board, and one message is clearly there's no time to waste. So there is no time left in addition to no time to waste. So I'm just saying to you all, hopefully you have a much better understanding of industry's priorities and how we're going to get there. So last thing I'd say is hopefully you're feeling motivated to go do it. If you've enjoyed this half as much as I have, please join me in giving a big round of applause to our panelists. Thank you guys again.